be in order. No person having received the majority of the whole number of votes cast, a speaker has not been elected.
Madam Clerk, I rise to say, wow.
I'm always amazed at people who send us here to change Washington. And then you start doing it, and they go, oh, don't do that. You might upend the apple cart. I want to upend the apple cart. That's why you sent me here.
It wasn't a fake fight. Too many fights up here are fake. It was a real, honest debate that played out in real time.
They accomplished things that I never thought I would see in Congress ever.
All of that was going on behind the scenes, and people weren't seeing that. What they were seeing is whatever was happening on the floor.
We had 20 people who were willing to go down to the floor of the House and take arrows. Didn't matter what everybody was throwing at us, saying that, well, you're risking the speakership. You guys are clowns. You guys are all self-centered. You're doing this for your own interest.
It's sometimes in politics where you're usually disappointed. Someone talks a big game, and then when the bright lights hit them, they find a reason to back away. But these 20-some folks, they knew if they held together, they could actually do something significant.
The purpose was for this time. We took advantage of this slim majority and absolutely made a difference.
Our system was designed for people to be involved. That's the ultimate check on the growth of government. What's the balance between the state and the individual is when people get involved and they contact their legislator. So the whole reason FreedomWorks exists is to work with people to help them make their voice heard. We try and take those barriers down. And the whole point is to get people involved so they let their congressman know, hey, this is what I would like to see changed in this bill. And the way that you get that is through the amendment process. But that's been closed. That's been shut down for years now.
The cake is almost always baked in the committee, and sometimes it's really hard to get on the committee that you need to be on for an issue that matters a lot to your constituents. If you don't get on that committee at the beginning of the year, all of your ability to represent your constituents was ceded.
Power had steadily moved away from members and into the hands of the Speaker. Now think back to the 1990s. When Newt Gingrich was Speaker, all of his caucus, and all of the Democrats, by the way, had the ability to make amendments and influence the way that bills were constructed. But as time went on, it got to be centralized with Speaker Hastert, Speaker Pelosi, and so on. And so now you had a time where the Speaker would simply say, this is what we're going to do, and all the members would have to go along with it in one way or the other. The Tea Party had very big hopes for 2010, and we were all really excited because you had so many good people getting elected. But what happened? They didn't realize that the rules and the way Washington operated was part of the problem. And that's why we continue to have years and years and years of good people getting elected, but no change that we were looking for taking place.
Here in Congress, you show up on any given week with not even a notion of what you're going to do that week. You don't know when you're going to vote. You don't know what you're going to vote on.
It's interesting that the House rules, which are supposed to be, of course, structured so that the House representative can function to do its job as the representatives of the people, often have been structured historically to empower a few at the expense of the entire body.
Congress is famous for passing these omnibus bills where we cram 12 spending bills into one and then add 10 or 20 other things that have nothing to do with those 12 spending bills. And then you take one vote and they would hold over your head that you would be blamed for shutting down the government if you didn't fund all of the things, including the things you didn't like.
The swamp, the critters who are here, they master process. They use process to maintain the status quo. So there's certain committees that are really important, Ways and Means and the Rules Committee, because the Rules Committee ends up setting up what you can and can't do. And through my time here in Washington, the type of folks I like to work with, they're usually frozen out of those top leadership positions.
Well, there's one rule that we had where you would get 3 days to read a bill. Well, of course, they figured out how to cheat on that pretty quickly. They would introduce the bill at 11:59 p.m. That counts as a day. If it touches the day by 1 minute, the parliamentarian decided. And then you would have 1 day, a real full 24 hours. Then for the third day, well, if we hurried up and voted in the morning, that counted as the third day. So they took the 3-day rule and compressed it into about 26 hours or 30 hours. To keep us from cheating on that, they changed it to an honest-to-goodness 72-hour rule, where the clock starts and now you got to take 72 hours. Well, they just suspend that rule every week and never held to it.
The Freedom Caucus was founded back under Speaker Boehner's time. These are people like Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows. They were getting locked out of the system, and they just didn't want to go and vote for a spending bill. They wanted to actually change it.
We had voted differently on a particular bill, actually on a rule where Jim had voted one way and I had voted another. And I came out the next morning, I said, Jim, if I'd known you were going to vote this way, I would have voted with you. And it was really just, there was not a whole lot of organization. We wanted to find people who were willing to vote against the rule of their own party and their own speaker. Jim and I called 4 people apiece. At the end of the day, 9 of us were the founding members.
And so the Freedom Caucus came together as a group of members that said, hey, if we stand together, we're going to be able to actually challenge spending. We're going to be able to challenge process.
I think what you'll find in Freedom Caucus is members that do things not with the view of the next election, but with a view of doing right by the American people, doing what they said they were going to do, and do what they think needs to be done to save the great Republic of America.
So John Boehner was one of the people who was elected as a reformer. So in theory, he should have been terrific, but what ended up happening? Well, he came along, DC co-opted him, nothing changed. So now you have the House Freedom Caucus say, we are determined to do things differently.
On July the 28th of 2015, I filed a thing called the motion to vacate the chair. At that point, if you had Googled it, no one could really tell you what it was. I found it in the Jefferson Manual. And when I filed it, it was really supposedly the end of my political career. And yet, during that battle, FreedomWorks was there with me, and they showed up.
No one thought you could ever topple a speaker. It was just impossible. And I remember getting text messages from members being like, hey, could you magnify this message? Can you keep your activist calling? And eventually the pressure got to the point where Speaker Boehner's position became untenable. And he was actually a casualty of the failure for Republicans to address spending.
He left 59 and a half days after I filed that motion. They realized that it was a direct result of the power of the House Freedom Caucus and our willingness to stand with the people of America.
When I first got here, I chafed under Speaker John Boehner. I thought he was the worst speaker ever. But we were still debating at that time 12 separate appropriations bills, and anybody was allowed to offer an amendment to cut spending on that particular bill. I didn't realize how good we had it.
We were hopeful to accomplish a more open process where amendments would be made in order. If anything, it actually got a little worse.
And then under Paul Ryan, he changed the rules, took away our voice, our ability to amend bills. He said they've all got to go through the Rules Committee, even on the appropriations bills. Everything has to be approved. And by the way, the Rules Committee would just pretty much shut down all the debate.
We were able to stop some bad things from happening by just stopping the votes entirely. But it didn't necessarily make things better.
And I didn't think it could get any worse until Speaker Pelosi came along. She would take individual bills after they came out of their committees and glue them together and call them en bloc votes. They'd stick 10 bills that had nothing to do with each other after they had already come out of committee, stick them together, and you would vote once and it would cover 10 or 20 bills. It got so bad that we had to do something.
You have to fix the process before you can actually start to fix politics.
A year before the 2022 election, members of the Freedom Caucus started talking about what rules need to be changed. How could we effectuate change?
A group of us got together on a weekly basis, member level, staff level, and started picking apart the rules, trying to figure out, well, what do we want to see change?
They met at CPI, where I'm a senior partner, a number of times. Normally in Washington, D.C., when you have these kind of discussions, it says, well, you know, I want to get in this fight because I want this particular position or I want more power here. Their focus really was all about making sure the American people had power. And that was what was refreshing to me.
The House Freedom Caucus approached then Leader McCarthy and said, we need to change the rules. We need to change the way the House of Representatives operates. But I don't think that those negotiations or conversations were taken very seriously in the early months of 2022 because we were supposed to have a massive red wave. And the House Freedom Caucus didn't exactly have the number of members necessary to impact any leverage points that we may have.
It looks like the Republicans are on a path to get a narrow majority, but that's not a red wave. That's nothing like a red wave.
So the fact of the matter is this red wave never materialized. That's just a very small, slim Republican majority.
What it means when you have such a slim majority is every voice in the majority needs to be considered. It used to be the case when we had a majority of 29 that 28 people could be ignored outright.
We got 222 to 212. You got to have 218 to pass any bill. And the Democrats aren't going to vote with us. So he can lose four people.
Suddenly, the day after the election, when you have a 5-person majority, it suddenly becomes really important to listen to everybody.
Right after the 2022 election, at FreedomWorks, we had what I call an off-campus hearing. And the focus of that hearing was on rules changes, things we'd like to see, how we might be able to go about getting those. That was instrumental because it further solidified our position, but it also notified leadership that we were serious about pursuing rules changes post-2022 election.
As we were building up to the beginning of this Congress, the 118th Congress, and the selection of the Speaker, House Republicans had met and had said that they wanted to choose Kevin as Speaker. We wanted to go to Kevin and say there are things that we think ought to change.
We had submitted Kevin McCarthy a list of rules, things we wanted changed, like getting bills 72 hours in advance before you have to vote on them. Single subject bills, not having bills that covered 10 different things, balanced budget, and vacate the chair. If he's not doing his job, we can put a bill on the floor for him to vacate the chair.
But I don't know that there was a real willingness to hear it. There's more of an encouragement to just maintain status quo in this town.
I came to the conclusion that I wouldn't support Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker a number of years ago. And I announced that before we ever got to the election, actually.
We went into caucus, which all that means is you go into a Republican meeting, all Republicans. 188 voted for Kevin McCarthy. You had 30 that did not. After that, he was answering questions, and I went up to the mic. I said, "Are you willing to commit to a 7-year balanced budget?" And his reply was no. I said, "That's it. I'm done. I'm not going to vote for you."
So how many Republicans said that they would not be supporting Leader McCarthy for Speaker? As I remember, it was about 5 of them who came out early and said they wouldn't, but we found out not too long after that was the tip of the iceberg.
So a full month before we were on the throes of the debate on the floor of the House, we had actually put out in full public view a memo outlining what we wanted to see change. So then there was a back and forth for the month, and we didn't get where we thought we needed to go. So we said, all right, we're not going to choose the Speaker yet.
FreedomWorks issued a key vote of no on voting for Leader McCarthy. And those key votes are important because that information gets reported to our activist network and helps them understand how their members voted on important questions.
We had gone to Kevin McCarthy January 2nd and said, this is our last, best, and final offer. It's policy, it's personnel, and it's the rules, it's the procedures of how we operate here in the House. And that was not agreed upon, so I knew that there would be multiple rounds. No one knew exactly how many. We were prepared to be here until the cherry blossoms bloomed.
My daughter was in labor having our first grandchild. And so I didn't know if I would get a speaker or I would get a grandson first. Turns out the grandson showed up before the speaker did.
So on January 3rd, I anticipated 12 or 13 people would vote, either for me or Jordan or somebody other than Kevin. Then we actually picked up an individual from Texas who was a freshman. We never even talked to him. We had no idea where he was. It made it real.
They didn't anticipate us going from 5 to 8 to 12 to 20. Now I get that I was going against 188, but they were wrong.
So when we came in on that day on January 3rd, we had the first vote and it went even better than we expected. We were very hopeful.
And so I think they thought that they could break us, so they just kept on having the votes. And as we actually added a couple numbers, it was apparent to them that we were not going to break.
19 Republicans support Jim Jordan, who wasn't even accepting it. Then you have Byron Donalds. He's next. He receives 20 votes. Victoria Spartz. Now, she's not a Freedom Caucus member, but she attended the meeting that took place here at FreedomWorks, and she started voting present. So it becomes very clear early on that there is a consistent group that is going to say no to Kevin McCarthy unless there are substantive changes made to make it something they could support.
And it was working, and it was actually gaining traction. And that's what was so amazing, is sometimes you come up with these ideas and only a couple people actually show up for the fight. But you had over 20 members that were leaning in and standing firm. And I knew they were under tremendous pressure, just absolutely tremendous pressure.
We were getting hammered by text messages, robocalls. People gave out our cell phone. My wife was getting calls. They were threatening us to take us down.
I got pressure from the highest levels of the Republican Party. They threatened to run ads in my district. They threatened to, everything that they could think of to put pressure on me.
We had members threatening us that if we didn't vote for McCarthy, we're going to lose our committee. Do it. I've cut grass before. I can vacuum carpet. I don't care what committee I'm on.
There were people from my district who were commenting both ways. Sean Hannity and I had a friendly discussion on his show, and there was a lot coming our way, but we knew that we were right.
You're going to have the ire of almost every single one of your colleagues. The media is not going to understand it. People at home aren't going to understand it. But you only have oftentimes one chance to make a difference, to make a change. And when that chance passes you by, you can't get it back.
You're talking to members, you're talking to member staff, you're on the phone, you're getting text messages. And what I just got this general sense is that I kind of expected halfway through that this whole thing was going to collapse. There's a lot of pressure on there just to go along and get along. But what just amazed me was when you would talk to a lot of these folks, I think about someone like a Ralph Norman, who I remember talking to. His conviction was just so strong. It's like he didn't care what this meant for his political future. It's like, we got to do this. And if we don't do this, the rest of it's not going to matter anyway. If you can't win on this type of process reform, what are we trying to do here?
Suddenly, people were looking from the outside at the House floor and going, these guys are actually trying to stand for something. And the tide turned.
So some people tried to personalize this fight, that this fight was about Kevin McCarthy and his role. And this was nothing to do with Kevin McCarthy. This had everything to do with process. What they wanted is the process that most Americans assumed already happens.
I say there were the never Kevins, the people who would never vote for Kevin, and there were the ever Kevins. I was a staunch, unflinching, barely Kevin, all 15 rounds. I learned a lesson from our battles with John Boehner and then Paul Ryan. I was a part of all three efforts to get rid of John Boehner. I helped organize the second two efforts, one with Jim Bridenstine and the third with Mark Meadows, which worked. But we did the lazy thing. We changed the person. We didn't change the institution. And so when John Boehner left and we got Paul Ryan, who I also didn't vote for, nothing changed. In fact, things got worse. What I wanted to see come out of that conflict was a better institution, not a different speaker.
There was a group that had started negotiating, not with McCarthy, but with McCarthy's team, about rules.
We had multiple meetings going on. Sometimes we were all in one room, sometimes we were divided up. We brought moderate Republicans in to help them understand what we were doing and even receive their input.
Where they said, well, what is it you're actually looking for? And so we kind of started laying it out. And they said, well, this is not a problem. Why is this a problem? And we're for this. And we started having this conversation. As long as we're staying on this track and we can fill in the details and we can get his agreement on these things, we'll vote for him.
We all just stuck together. We took the arrows. We sat down. We negotiated in good faith.
The 20, they were having meetings. The leadership was having meetings. I was meeting with the 20, talking about what happened during the Boehner efforts to get rid of Boehner. I think my biggest contribution to the January effort was to help the group come to the conclusion that a deal would be better than a different speaker. Because if you just get a different speaker, you might not get a deal.
And then I got kind of thrust into the middle of negotiating to see where we could get to reach conclusion on what it would look like. And over those, tumultuous days, we were late hours, we came to agreement. And, it was funny. There's a lot of people across the spectrum, the ideological spectrum of the conference, who sat down and said, well, that makes sense. I think I kind of want that too.
He started agreeing to a lot of what we wanted in writing. He agreed to balance the budget, not 7 years, 10 years. He agreed to vacate the chair, to one person to be able to vacate the chair. He agreed to have bills that we saw 72 hours in advance. He agreed to put conservatives in positions that we can make a difference.
They were actually really smart about the things they asked for and what they got. They got equal representation on the committees, particularly committees where conservatives have been denied slots, like Energy and Commerce, Finance, Appropriations, the Spending Committee. Leadership doesn't want conservatives on the Spending Committee. How are you going to spend all this money?
If you're negotiating in a deal and you get what you asked for, well then take the deal.
So once we had a rules package that worked, we removed the key vote so that it would not be a negative for members who voted for Leader McCarthy, because that was our way of saying we support what they're doing in terms of rules and running the chamber.
I continue to hold out against Mr. McCarthy for a number of reasons, and my suggestion to the people who are advocating to go ahead and change their vote for him in order to get the rule changes was, get your rule changes first. There's two aspects of that. You have to get the rule changes through the whole body, so that's a vote. And the second thing is he going to adhere to the rule changes, because this body is famous for waiving rule changes.
There were things that were not secure yet. There were threats from more moderate Republicans that they were going to vote against the rules package after the speaker was named. That was not very encouraging for us to move forward. We didn't feel like we had this in the bag just yet.
When we moved to the 14th vote, I anticipated, because we had been very closely communicating, very closely, very tight, I thought that it probably was going to wrap up during the 14th vote.
It's all set on the 14th vote. It's supposed to happen, and it doesn't. They're off by just one vote. What do you have? Everything explodes again. You have this flurry of activity.
There was some animated engagements there on the House floor.
And what does that mean? Well, let's just postpone it to the next week.
There was going to be a motion to adjourn, and some of us were of the belief that we ought to keep going and finish the job. The vote was called, the motion to adjourn was going, but there was still a debate being had among some of my colleagues who had yet held out their vote.
And I was at the back with four of us, and we just said, look, there's nothing left to be gained. It's now time to go forward, and we did. And that's why we voted present.
I had a card down there ready to switch my vote from a yes to adjourn, which I didn't think we should do, and I was talking to Kevin's team and others, and I said, guys, I'm about to flip it to a no. I had my red card filled out. And then one of the members who had been holding out came out and said, I think we've got an agreement that we'll vote by present. Well, suddenly then Kevin and everybody were running around and saying, whoa, go down and change your vote. We want to not adjourn so we can continue to do this. And I thankfully was already down there and dropped my red card off and switched my vote and then got out of the way. And then we flipped it, and then the rest is history.
That gave McCarthy enough.
That was easy, huh? I never thought we'd get up here.
And without question, the concessions weakened the speakership and empowered individual members.
I like some of those, by the way. Let me say this. I think I had too much power as speaker.
Oh, really?
I really do.
Congress never meant to be a dictatorship of any speaker, because each of us has diverse experiences, represent diverse districts, and bring a lot to the table. And I think if we truly represent the people, each of us has to be able to have an input.
And already we've seen for the first time in years amendments offered on the House floor and legislation. Still a lot of progress to be made, but we have probably the best opportunity we've had in many, many years to actually work for the American people.
We're very proud of the stand that we took in the speaker race to change the rules and the procedures, the policies that will be coming to the House floor, and even the personnel. We have conservatives on the Rules Committee.
I see every bill, I see every amendment, and we can make changes. 3 of us were on there: Chip Roy, Thomas Massie, and me.
I was added to the House Rules Committee as a result of what happened in the Speaker's debate. I didn't set out to do it, but I was asked to do it both by the Speaker and by my compatriots in the 20.
There was just no way that we were going to see conservatives on the Rules Committee, because the Rules Committee actually keeps structure in terms of what gets voted on, what does not get voted on. If you had asked me to bet $5 of your money 10 years ago, believing that I would see it, I'd say that's a bad bet.
The Rules Committee hasn't been important for about 60 years, because it's also understood for the last 60 years that it would be a rubber stamp for the Speaker of the House. The composition is that there are 9 members of the majority and 4 members of the minority. It's very lopsided. It always turns out for the speaker. We got 3 seats on that committee. Now do the math. You've got 9, take away 3 is 6. If the leadership wants to ram an agenda through without considering the 3 and says we're not going to talk to you, they've got 6 votes. Well, the Democrats always vote no, so there's 4 reflexive no's and 3 join them. So now it's 6-7. Every bill before it goes to the floor has to go through the Rules Committee. Every amendment before it comes to the floor for a vote has to go through the Rules Committee. The amount of time we're going to debate the bill is decided by the Rules Committee, and it's already changed the way this place works.
Even this Congress, there have been many times where certain members of leadership have said, hey, let's suspend the 72-hour rule and just move forward with this. And because we have conservatives on the House Rules Committee, they say, no, we fought too hard to make sure that we get this right.
I think the American people were the big winners, right? You now have a better ability to see the bills, with the requirement that you have 72 hours. That rule is really for them.
Now, I know people think, that's ridiculous, only 72 hours? You guys should have weeks to read the bill. Listen, I know if you gave some of my colleagues a year to read these bills, they wouldn't read them, even if they were 1 page. But the American people can read the bill. They can call their congressman and tell them what's in the bill if the congressman doesn't know, or how it would affect them in the real world. Every member up here in the House of Representatives represents approximately 750,000 people. I don't care if you've been here 1 day or 20 years, you represent the same number of people, so your voice should be the same, regardless of seniority. That's what the new rules do by allowing anybody to offer an amendment to a bill after it's come out of committee. And then in the Rules Committee, we take a look at it. We say, is this germane? But if somebody is genuinely trying to improve the bill with an amendment, then we think they should get a vote on the floor of the House. And then they either carry the day or they don't. But they get their vote and they get a recorded vote.
We've diffused power away from the center. There's more opportunities to participate. Because of the rule changes, your member of Congress, your representative, actually has more of an opportunity than ever before to bring something to the floor, debate it.
People say, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Well, guess what? We don't control the Senate and we don't have the White House. So at this moment, the best thing we can provide the American people is transparency. The process now is something that you can follow. Your congressman can't hide behind an omnibus vote. They can't say, well, I didn't like this, but I had to vote for that because it had this other thing in it.
One of the things that I can ask for, because I'm no longer a member of Congress, pick up the phone and do 2 things. Call some of the 20 to let them know that you appreciate the fact that they were willing to stand up at great personal cost. Some of these people will go home because they're in marginal districts. They will get an ad run against them that will be well funded. They were willing to do that. And the other is if your member was not part of the 20, kindly, respectfully call them and just say, we want a more open process that represents our voice. Please make sure that you support future rule changes that do exactly that.
I can't tell you how impactful it is when constituents call my office, when they send messages, when they write letters and emails. We read these.
The American people have much more impact on this body than they think or understand. If they call, these guys and gals listen. I've been here repeatedly when things have occurred from the outside that moved people on the inside. And so my encouragement to the American people is, use your voice. I promise you, members listen.
I'm glad that we took a little extra time to make sure that we got this right. I believe that he is a stronger, more effective speaker today than he would have been without these changes.
The speaker's deal, tremendous victory. But it's kind of like you got that victory. What are you going to do with it now?
So what happened in the speaker's fight set the stage for the next big battle, which was the debt ceiling. And that served as a healthy reminder that the rules themselves didn't magically fix everything in Washington. But for the first time in years, they've allowed the people to have a voice in the process, and now we have to try to keep it that way.
This place has a default position that it wants to spring back to at all times. But this is going to be a 24/7, 365-day effort to keep this on track.
Kevin will come and go, Chip Roy will come and go. Our job is to try to create an institution that we pass down to the next Congress that reflects our founding principles and empowers them to fight for their constituents.